Snow arrived in the final breaks of January, a silent guest settling over a weary nation. It dusted the broken outlines of cities, still healing from the war's long shadow. To the people, it seemed a gentle coverlet, a clean blanket laid over the soot and rubble. Children pressed noses to cold glass, dreaming of sleds and snowball fights in the morning light. But morning brought not a playground, but a siege. The sky turned the color of old lead, and the snow fell not in flakes but in thick, relentless sheets. They smothered the roads of Kent and drifted against London's silent buses. The scrape of shovels became the day's first music, a rasping chorus in the dawn gloom. Inside cramped terraces, hands fed precious coal to hungry grates, the flames casting long dancing shadows. Electricity faltered, a flickering pulse in the deepening white. That first night, families huddled under blankets, listening to the wind's low moan. And could know this was merely the overture. To none imagined the freeze would cling for months, a white shroud over the bones of spring. A strange beauty lived in those early days. Profound quiet descended, swallowing the familiar clamor of industry and trade. Was a silence so complete you could hear the frost knitting its crystals on the pane. Beneath it, the whole island seemed to hold its breath. Dawn on the second day revealed a world transformed, muted and pure. Snows orbed all sound, leaving only the creak of a burdened roof or the soft sigh of a settling drift. In the city, milk bottles stood frozen on doorsteps, their cranes thrust upward like tiny ivory towers. Abandoned buses became spectral shapes, their windows blind with frost. The great machine of London had ground to a halt, a clockwork spring and wound. Further north, in the high valleys of Yorkshire, the drifts grew taller than a man. Farmers woke to barn doors sealed shut by solid walls of ice. Heaps stood immobilized in the fields, their wool stiff as board, breath plumbing in the still air. Inside stone cottages, the cold was an active presence. It passed at the walls, painted intricate forests of frost on the window glass. Mothers coaxed life from near minus dead stoves, but the coal was dwindling. In a small house outside Manchester, a man named Harold stared into the whiteness. He had endured a blitz, a rationing, the years of whispered fear. His cold felt different. It was not a blow, but an embrace as low, patient, and suffocating. It waited at the threshold, seeped through every crack, and showed no sign of leaving. The children still laughed then, tracing shapes on the frozen glass. That their breath hung in clouds, and their fingers stayed numb long after they came inside. The radio in the corner murmured calmly of more snow to come. The words fell like a sentence, accepted with a weary nod. By late February, a great stillness had claimed the land. Even the wind seemed tired, whispering over frozen hedgerows and stilled streams. The Thames itself began to stiffen at its edges, the ice like list slowly stretching toward the center. Barges work out mid-minus channel, their hulls groaning softly against the tightening grip. Villages became isolated islands, their lights dim and few. Trains were phantoms delayed for days, their whistles faint and mournful across the white expanse. Postmen, their beards crusted with ice, delivered the same grim news with each letter. They say the coal's running out. In parlors, fairies gathered around a single hearth as if at an altar. Blankets hung over doorways to trap the feeble warmth. The scent of damp wool and wood smoke was the scent of that winter. At night, blackout curtains returned, not against bombers, but against the draft. People lay awake listening to the house settle, the snap of ice outside, the distant, struggling cry of a train. It was a winter with a consciousness, a season that felt sentient and merciless. Yet on clear nights, a low, bright moon cast the world in silver and blue. For a moment, the hardship seemed beautiful, almost holy, and so they endured, breath by cold breath, unaware the deepest dark was yet to come. Then the darkness descended. Electricity, starved of fuel, began to fail across the nation. Street lamps flickered and died, plunging cities into a profound blackness. The government announced rolling blackouts, or as each day without power, heat, or light. In London, night fell like a spill of ink. Candles flickered in jam jars on tables, their light trembling. The comforting buzz of radios fell silent, replaced by the soft hiss of wax and the murmur of low voices. Cinemas went dark. Factories stood idle. Even the warm glow of bakery windows vanished as ovens grew cold. In the industrial towns, workers trudged home through streets blacker than the coal they could not have. Their footsteps were the only sound, a slow crunch on the ice. At home, families huddled in near-minus dark rooms. The only constant was the slow, measured tick of a clock. Another spun tales of spring sunshine, of warmth that felt like a forgotten dream. Fathers stared into the embers, counting the remaining lumps of fuel. 1, 2, perhaps 3. In some villages, neighbors pooled their misery and their warmth. They gathered in one room, around one fire. The heat was meager, but the shared presence was a kind of sustenance. Someone would hum a half-minus remembered tune. Wheat tea was brewed over a tiny flame and shared. Through the frost-minus rim-ed windows, the stars shone with a fierce, unfamiliar clarity, and met by any earthly light. The darkness became a companion in those hours. It taught a new kind of patience, a quiet entering. Time was measured not by clocks, but by the slow shortening of a candle. In that deep, immense silence, a nation waited. That waited for the trains to run, for the lights to return, for the promise of a thaw. By March, the country's pulse was faint and thread-wide. The snow remained. At a deeper chill it set in the chill of empty bins and silent mines. Kill was the lifeblood, and it was frozen solid. Drifts buried the pit heads of whales in the Midlands. Wagons stood locked in ice, their precious cargo mere feet away, yet idly unreachable. In Whitehall, ministers met by candlelight, their breath visible in the chill rooms. Reports from every shire told the same story. The arteries were blocked. The heart was failing. Back in the villages, people burned whatever would catch. A broken chair, a shelf from the pantry, the leg of an old piano, its wood cracking with a sound like a final, mournful chord. Newspapers called it the coal famine. Headlines were black, mirroring the grim reality. In Sheffield, the great steel presses went cold. In Glasgow, men stood idle in silent shipyards, hands deep in pockets, watching smoke minus less stacked. Yet, in this bitter scarcity, small graces persisted. They widows shared whole asked briquettes. Children gathered twigs from the hedgerows, presenting them as solemn offerings for the fire. When a coal lorry did miraculously appear, its wheels spinning on the ice, people lying the streets not with anger, but with a quiet, desperate gratitude. Each so the fuel was hope, wind measured like gold. Still, the sky remained a lid of unbroken gray. The sun, when it appeared, was a pale coin offering light, but no warmth. It was a taunt. In the countryside, the snow had hardened into a crusted, great abyss. Streams were locked under thick ice, the water whispering impotently below. Farmers carried feed to cattle that stood huddled and steaming, the breath of thick fog. Chickens stopped laying. In the barns, the only sounds were the shift of a hoof and the groan of timber and the grip of the frost. Hay grayness seeped into everything, into the faces and the bread queues, into the stone of the buildings, into the spirit itself. The air in homes smelled of damp woolen tallow, yet beneath the weariness, an ember glowed. Women washed clothes in water that numbed the hands. Thin men mended boots with stiff fingers, speaking a little that were conniving. A quiet rhythm of endurance persisted, footsteps on frozen pavements, the low exchange of a few words between neighbors. At night the grate evened to black. Only a few windows showed a dim, amber glow. In that darkness, people dreamed not of warmth, whose memory had faded, but of color, of green, of yellow light, of a sky that moved. The railways, those iron veins, worst wrangling. Hacks vanished into canyons of snow. Signal posts stood like lonely sentinels, only their tips visible. The great steam engines were half-minus buried in gleaming white tombs. In the Scottish Highlands, a passenger train was lost for days, sealed in a drift. Inside, passengers huddled in coats, sharing biscuits that froze in their hands. Guides burned splinters of packing crates in the corridor, the smoke a bitter offering to the cold. Elsewhere, crews fought with shovels and pickaxes, hacking at walls of ice taller than themselves. The sound of metal on frozen ground rang out like a dull bell. On a train did move. It crept through a silent, dreamlike landscape. Children watched from cottage windows as these iron beasts cinched past, black smoke trailing like a banner of defiance. Frank's whistle, thin and distant, was a sound of life. It was proof that where the world turned. At the stations, men worked through the night, their shovels scraping on frozen stone. Every arrival was a minor miracle. Every train that broke through was a testament to stubborn will. But, for everyone that arrived, another lay stranded in the white silence waiting, and still the cold did not break. Even the rivers surrendered. The Severn, the Trent, the Thames all lay gripped under ice so thick it could bear a man's weight. In places, children dared to skate, their laughter skittering across the glassy surface until it was swallowed by distance. At Oxford, the Thames gleamed like a slab of polished grey stone. Barges were frozen in place, their crews stranded with dwindling supplies. The banks were hard as iron. Frost feathered the reeds, and they rattled like bones when the wind passed. In the north, smaller streams became ghostly white ribbons. Fishermen stared at the unnatural stillness, wondering what life was trapped below. Some claimed to hear the ice groan at night, a deep, alive sound. For those by the waterways, hardship was paired with a stark wonder. Water pumps were solid. People chipped blocks from the riverbank to melt over fires. Women carried heavy pails home, steam rising from the lids into the brittle air. Every wisp of vapor was a small treasure. There were moments of breathtaking beauty. At dawn, the world turned to silver and diamond. Hoar frost clothed every branch, and the frozen rivers mirrored the sky so perfectly it seemed the heavens had fallen. Birds left delicate tracings in the snow, their wingtips brushing the surface. In those quiet mornings, as smoke rose thin and straight from chimneys, an eerie peace prevailed. It was the peace of a world in suspension. But beneath that calm lay danger. The thaw, when it came, would bring flood and ruin. For now, Britain slept within the ice between one breath and the next. Then the wind turned. It was no longer merely cold. It burned. It came from the east, from the Siberian grains, a wind that carried news of ice. It scoured the open fields of Lincolnshire and Norfolk. Farmers leaned into it, their scarves frozen into stiff masks. Children woke to find frost on their blankets where the cold had crept in. In schools, ink solidified in the wells. The small stoves in the corners glowed dull red, giving no heat. In the cities, the narrow streets became wind tunnels. Laundry froze on the lines into bizarre, rigid sculptures. Shop doors opened only a crack. People lay in their coats with newspaper, the rustle a common sound on the few running buses. The newspapers themselves told tales of quiet tragedy. Elderly couples found beside dead fires, livestock lost, villages cut off for weeks. The government urged calm, but the word had lost its meaning. That night, the wind found its voice. It moaned in the lanes, rattled shutters, whispered through keyholes. It carried the scent of far minus off frost and a profound loneliness. Yet life persisted. Women walked miles for a pail of water, and dug paths to their neighbors. Candles flickered in windows, tiny, brave declarations against the storm. The wind could bite, but it could not extinguish the quiet courage burning in every home. In the high valleys of Wales, there were hamlets that vanished from sight. One such was Llangwyn, nestled between the hills. For 3 weeks, no one entered or left. The posts stopped. The milk cart never came. The telephone line fell silent. Inside their stone cottages, the people lived by the rhythm of daylight and dark. They rose with the faint glow, worked until it faded, then gathered by candlelight. They shared flour, potatoes, a few tins of milk. Each evening, they met in the chapel, the only building large enough for all. Someone lit the old iron stove, the air filled with the smell of peat and melting snow. They sang hymns, their voices weaving together in the dark. a fragile tapestry of sound. One man, Evan the blacksmith, took a spade each dawn and walked toward the buried road. He dug in silence, the chink of his tool echoing across the valley. Each night, people watched for his return, a dark shape moving slowly against the endless white. It was in these isolated places that Britain's true character showed. No one waited for rescue. They adapted. Snow was melted for water. Curtains became blanket. Children wrote old stories of frost fairs, of times when cold was a festival, not a famine. 5 months sent. The snow around Llangwin was higher than the windowsills. Yet each morning, a column of smoke rose from every roof. A quiet statement. We're still here. In the towns, life had slowed to a crawl. Markets lay under frost. Stalls abandoned. Wooden crates frozen shut. The air smelled of damp straw and cold stone, not of bread or fruit. Bakers worked in dim kitchens, their earth unstarved of fuel. The long queues of shivering people formed outside, faces wrapped in scarves. Each loaf was rationed, the exchange of bread for coupons a solemn ritual. Shop windows were opaque with frost, the glass graved like cracked crystal. Inside, the shelves were almost bare. Families scavenged, trading a scrap of fuel for a tin of jam, a bag of sugar. Footsteps echoed on icy pavements, a reminder the city, though quiet, was not dead. Tread and buses moved with agonizing slowness, wheels fighting the drifts. Drivers were bundles of woolen drag, their breath fogging the windscreen. Children watched from upstairs windows, hoping for movement in the static world. Evenings brought a peculiar, intimate stillness. The blackout continued, leaving only hearth minus lightened candles. The air inside held the smells of cooking, amp wool, and soot. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, sharing stories, forging bonds that made the cold bearable. There was a quiet dignity to it all. Each frozen market, each empty street spoke of resilience. People endured, quiet and firm, determined to outlast the cold, the scarcity, the long nights. Beyond the towns, the countryside was a world transformed. Fields lay under undisturbed drifts that reflected a pale, haunted light. Fences disappeared. Hedgerows were rigid with frost, brittle to the touch. Farmers moved like explorers through the white expanse. Oots sank deep. Bath-plumed, cows huddled together in barn corners, tails frozen, flanks pressed for warmth. Chickens nestled in hay, each feather rim-edged with ice. The wind-swept lanes were treacherous, snowdrifts hiding carts. Horses slipped and strained. Every day was an arithmetic of survival. Water had to be melted. Fodder was rationed with extreme care. Pathways were kept open for medicine, for news. At twilight, shadows stretched long across the ice-glazed fields. A faint pink might touch the horizon, a promise that felt like a lie. The only sounds were the creak of trees, the clatter of icicles falling, the low call of a solitary bird. Even in desolation, beauty persisted. Thickles hung from pine roofs like crystal spears. Footprints of foxes and deer created ephemeral art in the snow. It was a frozen world, quiet and unforgiving, yet alive in its own slow way. Every drift, every icy stream, every brutal branch told a story of endurance. For the children, the world was both enchantment and trial. Snowdrifts became castles. Frozen ponds turned to glittering playgrounds. Their laughter was a sharp, bright sound against the pervasive hush. But frostbite was a constant shadow. Mothers called warnings, pressing mittens onto small hands. Boots cracked and soaked through. Play was a calculated risk. Schooling had nearly ceased. Teachers who braved the drifts found ink frozen solid, chalk dust hanging in the cold air. Lessons were short, placed by storytelling, as songs to keep the spirit from freezing too. Tales of frost fairs, of adventures in snow, filled the room. Inside cottages, evenings were gentle and slow. Children sat close to the fire, legs tucked under blankets, listening. Their imaginations became a refuge, a place where winter was an adventure, not a siege. Small kindness brought light, vain neighbors sharing a few lumps of coal. an elderly woman leaving knitted mittens on a doorstep. These simple acts reinforced a quiet lesson. In hardship, community was the true hearth. Outside, the world remained whitened and yielding. Inside, a genuine resilience took root. Even in frost and darkness, children learned courage, patience, and the quiet magic of a shared spark. Across towns and villages, chimney smoke was a lifeline, a signal in the gray sky, and as cold dwindled, the fires burned low and dirty. Soot dusted window sills, hands, and faces with a gray film. The felt rooms with a tangy acrid smell. Acres, desperate to keep ovens lit, mixed thin coal with wood scraps. The smoke clung to hair, to clothes, to the very walls. In urban alleys, it lingered, mingling with the frozen fog that hugged the ground. Horse-drawn carts labored through the ruts. The air held a strange cocktail of coal, frost, and the distant, ghostly scent of baking bread. Yet in that smoke, there was warmth. Hearth fires crackled, casting an amber glow that danced on walls. Families huddled close, sharing stories, tea, the last of the food. Even children, cheeks smudged with soot, found comfort in the flickering light. Sometimes the smoke itself seemed purposeful. It twisted and climbed, painting fleeting patterns against the low clouds. In its movement, it carried a stubborn hope that warmth, light, and normality would return. Even in the coldest days, people found ways to endure, turning soot and linus-stained ruins into sanctuaries of quiet life. Transport became an epic of sheer will. Roads were ribbons of ice, treacherous and slow. Trains crept along buried lines, their whistles ghostly in the stillness. Buses crawled, wheels locked, engines coughing in protest. Drivers were swaddled in layers, hands frozen on the wheels. The few passengers huddled together, sharing body heat, a fragile defense. Every journey, however short, was a test. For farmers, isolation was acute. Supplies depended on luck and perseverance. Some walked miles over frozen fields to reach a shop, snow crunching underfoot, the air burning their lungs. In industrial towns, deliveries of raw materials slowed to a trickle. Factories stood silent. Work, that was once routine, now demanded heroism. Communities adapted, sharing what little they had, taking turns to venture out. Yet movement persisted. A single lorry breaking through brought waves of relief. It was a sign that life could still reach the frozen places. Each successful journey, no matter how small, was a reminder. Endurance and cooperation were the keys. Britain pressed on, slow and deliberate, one frozen step at a time. Evenings held their own sacred rhythm. Families gathered close to the hearth, the fire's faint warmth the center of their universe. Shadows stretched and contracted on the walls, alive in the flame minus light. Mothers and fathers told stories. Tales of winters cast, of foxes in the snow, of soldiers coming home. Each narrative was carefully woven, a spell against the cold. The smell of wheat tea mingled with wood smoke. A slice of bread, a scrap of sugar, was shared as the story unfolded, making it a feast. Children listened, eyes wide, cheeks flushed from the fire's glow. Neighbors sometimes joined, walking through the snow to sit together. Songs were hummed, recollections whispered. A single candle could light an entire evening of companionship. In these small circles of light, the winter softened. Outside, the wind howled and drifts loomed. Inside, there was warmth, comfort, and a sense of togetherness. Life persisted, not in defiance of the cold, but in a kind of harmony with it. Each story was a gentle promise. Spring would come. Communication itself became a trial. Mail deliveries slowed to a crawl. Letters took weeks. Postmen, wrapped like mummies, navigated drifts taller than fences. The wheels of mail carts groaned on the ice. Villagers waited anxiously for news. A letter was a lifeline, a threat to the outside world. Families huddled as envelopes were carefully opened, the brittle paper threatening to tear. Each line was read aloud, a ritual that brought comfort and connection. In some places, telegraph lines, coated in ice, snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Towns were isolated. Farmers sent runners with messages tied to sticks, traveling miles over treacherous ground. Children watched these brave couriers disappear into the white, returning hours later with replies, greeted with quiet relief. Even in cities, communication faltered. Newspapers were printed sporadically, presses hampered by frozen machinery. Rumors mingled with official news. Yet each time a letter arrived, or a telegraph ticked to life, it was a reminder. They were not alone. Across Britain, others were enduring the same long night. In this way, even in Fireland, people remained connected. Brits traveled slowly, but when they arrived, they carried the warmth of human presence, the assurance that life, thus suspended as moving forward. The farms were worlds in stasis. Fields that should have been green lay buried. Every furrow, every stone was hidden. Ah. Work continued, slow and arduous. Farmers shoveled snow from barn doors, muscles burning. Hues sank into layers of powder over hardened ice. Horses strained, breath clouding the air. Souls, men and women, wrapped in layers, moved with deliberate slowness. Feeding livestock was a battle. Hay, frozen solid, had to be broken apart. Water was melted from ice in great cauldrons. Steam rising in a brief, vain veil. Chickens and sheep huddled. Farmers whispered to them, soft words carrying over the still land. Small victories were celebrated quietly. A barn cleared, a stream accessed, a horse led safely from adrift. These modest successes reminded everyone that life could continue, even when time seemed frozen. At day's end, exhaustion was a heavy cloak. Hands were raw, faces wind-burned, every movement stiff. But in the cottage, by the fire, families gathered. They shared meager meals and stories, finding comfort in the simple endurance of one more day. By March's end, hope began to sting whispers. People spoke of thaw, of green, of rivers running free. But the sky remained a relentless gray. The snow, compacted and hardened, refused to yield. Each morning, frost still feathered the windows. Icicles hung like glass daggers. The cold bit with undiminished teeth. Farmers checked streams with growing concern. Ice that was once thin now stretched solid, creaking under its own weight. The thaw felt like a distant rumor. Fat tried to tip at the fire. Spades struck ice, the crack echoing like a shot. In cities, streets were a mix of compacted snow and grimy slush. Trains and lorries continued their pathetic crawl. People wore patched coats, scarves wrapped many times, gloves stuffed with paper. The promise of warmth teased but did not arrive. Even daylight offered little solace. The pale sun rarely pierced the clouds. But when it did, its weak rays did nothing to soften the world. Shadows were long and cold. Every flicker of brightness vanished quickly, leaving everything in muted monochrome. Yet Britain endured. People adapted. Coal was rationed with precision. Fires were stoked with care. Children learned to layer clothing. Neighbors shared. The foe remained absent. Human resilience flourished quiet, steadfast, a warmth no frost could touch. In the villages, snow became both barrier and companion. Children, bundled beyond recognition, transformed drifts into playgrounds. Sleds carved silver streaks down hillsides. Laughter, crisp and bright, echoed over silent fields. Adults watched with a mix of worry and joy. Fingers numbed in mittens, boots packed with ice, cheeks stung rain. Yet the simple thrill of movement brought a rare lightness. Some parents pulled sleds, their pace slow, breath plumbing. Animals joined in. Horses stepped carefully along beaten tracks. Dogs bounded ahead, noses buried in snow, leaving paw-print lace. Wildlife, foxes, rabbits adjusted their rhythms, moving with the cadence of survival. These snow paths were more than play. They were vital arteries, connecting cottages, barns, and neighbors. They allowed messages, firewood, and supplies to pass. Every groove in the snow was a lifeline carved by endurance. As the sun dipped, painting the horizon in muted pinks, The fret slowed. Children rushed home, boots slushing, hands clutching at promised cups of tea. Outside, the wind whispered through frozen fields. But inside, laughter and warmth lingered, day quiet defiance against the winter's law refusal. Rivers and canals, as liquid highways, fell silent. Barges rested motionless, hulls frozen into the Thames, the Trent, the Mersey. Faint groans and pops echoed from the ice, reminders of immense pressure trapped below. In towns along the waterways, life slowed to a near stop. Fishermen chipped at frozen nets. Children dared to step onto thinner ice, skating with cautious joy. Each venture held risk and a spark of adventure. In cities, frozen ox created deary still minus lives. Ropes were stiff as wire. Barrels wore coats of ice. Cranes stood idle against gray skies. The smell of coal, water, and frost mingled day metallic, cold scent. Farmers and townsfolk rethought daily life around these frozen arteries. Water for cooking had to be chipped from ice or carried in heavy pails. Supplies once brought by boat now required extraordinary effort. Each bucket of melted water felt like a triumph. By twilight, the frozen waterway seemed serene, quiet mirrors reflecting resilience and vulnerability. Smoke curled from chimneys along the banks, a subtle reminder. Warmth in life persisted, stubborn and enduring. With snow deep and rivers frozen, coal distribution became the central drama. Rail lines were blocked by drifts taller than the carriages. Workers labored for hours, swinging pickaxes against frozen earth, each strike rang through the quiet like a solemn bell. In towns, queues for coal became a daily pilgrimage. Men and women waited for hours in the biting wind, scarves tight, hats low. Children clung to parents, eyes wide with fatigue. The lines stretched down streets, moving inch by inch, a testament to patience. Those at the front word ranted hope. The free shovel FUL was treasured, used with utmost care. Families rationed heat, burning only what was necessary. A few pieces shared between neighbors could mean the difference between a tolerable night and a frostbitten morning. Sometimes tensions simmered, but more often there was camaraderie. Strangers shared advice. Jokes were whispered. Small kindness were offered. The bleakness softened by community, however brief. Night fell. Lamps flickered in frosted windows. Smoke from tiny fires climbed toward the gray sky. Home, though scarce, was hope made tangible. Each household, though shivering, felt a small victory in the battle against the cold. The streets of Britain were hushed under the relentless snow. Footsteps crunched softly on compacted drifts, the only sound in muffled towns. Drawn carts moved slowly, wheels groaning. The occasional cry of a child echoed, then was swallowed. Shop windows, coated in frost, displayed only the glimmer of ice. Shelves were bare. The scent was of cold stone and damp wood. Streets that once steamed felt suspended, as if time had slowed. Yet life continued quietly. Neighbors exchanged greetings through frost-covered windows. Children left tiny footprints, weaving patterns in the snow. Dogs padded alongside. At night, during the blackout, only candle-glow illuminated doorways. Shadows stretched long and soft. The wind whispered, rattling shutters, stirring loose snow. Yet, in this quiet, there was beauty. Frozen streets became reflective mirrors, capturing moonlight and candle flame. The world turned into a tapestry, a soft lightened shadow. Within this hushed landscape, resilience shone. Small acts of endurance, subtle gestures of care, the unwavering persistence to live, even when the world seemed paused in frost. As darkness fell, homes became sanctuaries. The earth-fires glowed faintly, casting every light on frost-lined walls. The scent of burning coal, tinged with wood, filled rooms. Clinging to clothing was a fragile shield against the pervasive chill. Families gathered close, legs under blankets, hands around warm mugs. Even the simplest meal was transformed. A thin slice of bread, a few boiled potatoes, shared in silence or soft conversation. Flames flickered, throwing gentle shadows that danced across faces. Sometimes neighbors joined around a single fire, especially in isolated places. Shared warmth became both physical and emotional, knitting people together. Stories were told in hushed voices, memories of spring, tales of frost fairs, whispered anecdotes of past hardship. Each story reinforced endurance and hope. Smoke from the hearth spiraled upward, mingling with the frozen air, a visual reminder of life persisting. Even small fires, early enough to simmer water, were treasured. Their glow was a beacon in a frozen world. As the night deepened, the world outside remained still vast and white. Inside, gentle light, warmth, and human presence endured. Each night's fire was a ritual, a marker of survival, a reminder that even in the coldest times, life could be nurtured with patience and care. By mid-March, the railways were frozen and silent. Tracks disappeared. Signal posts barely peeked above the white. Switches were locked in ice. Engines coughed and steamed in vain, wheels slipping on frost-coated rails. Station masters and workers fought tirelessly. They shoveled drifts from platforms. They chipped ice from tracks. They spread sand where they could. Every movement was slow, deliberate, exhausting. Faces were rimmed with frost. Gloves were stiff. Breath hung in clouds. Passengers waited patiently, bundled in layers. Children peered out, noses against frosted glass. When trains did arrive, their whistles sounded like distant ghosts. They brought hope. Freight trains carrying coal and food faced the same struggles. Coal wagons froze solid. Cows had to chip the blocks free. Every delivery that reached a village was celebrated quietly. A lifeline. Even amid these frozen arteries, human perseverance endured. Crews worked through blizzards. Passengers waited with the patience of necessity. Each successful journey was a small triumph, a reminder that even when immobilized, life continued inch by inch. Cots had transformed under the winter's weight. Roofs sagged under snow. Windows were at frost. Doorways were barricaded with blankets. Every crevice was a potential escape for warmth. Inside, heat was precious. Fires were ended with devotion. Coal was rationed for cooking and warmth. Hearths glowed dimly in rooms shaded by curtains. The flickering flames cast moving shadows on walls lined with coats and blankets. Families gathered close. Children tucked into laps. Kitchens and parlors became one room, the hub of survival. Every meal was simple, but prepared with care. Thin soups, boiled vegetables, whatever scraps remained. The air smelled of smoke, wood, and the metallic tang of frost. Small comforts persisted. The neighbor might pass along a few sticks. Children played with makeshift toys. A hearth became the center of community and hope. At night, the cold pressed against windows and walls. But inside, warmth, light, and resilience endured. Each home was a sanctuary, a small world held together by fire, shared stories, and unspoken determination. During the long nights, a new sound became familiar. The subtle music of frost. Ice creaked on rooftops, releasing tiny avalanches. Chimneys groaned under layers of ice. Trees shifted and cracked under their frozen burden. Inside cottages, these sounds were both unsettling and comforting. The wind howled, that the crackle of the hearth was a constant reminder. Children listened wide-eyed, identifying each snap and pop. Ice shifting outside, the roof settling, a branch breaking. In towns, frozen streets echoed faintly. The muted clatter of boots, the slow rumble of a cart, the occasional whistle of a steam engine. A sparse sounds marked life persisting, a heartbeat beneath the frozen world. Some evenings, the frost created delicate beauty. Windows covered in rime formed intricate patterns, crystalline leaves, and feathers etched by the cold. Every creak, every hiss became part of a winter symphony, a quiet accompaniment to the routines of survival. People adapted to these sounds, for frost, once menacing, became familiar. It reminded them of the world outside, vast and frozen. It highlighted the warmth and light, and nurtured inside, preserving hope against the lingering grip of winter. The long nights were made darker by persistent blackouts. Electricity was sporadic. Street lights remained extinguished. The glow of a lamp in a window was a rare sight. Inside, families relied on candles and oil lamps. Their soft glow turned rooms into cocoons of amber light. The quiet was profound. Wind howled. Snow drifted. Dark streets seemed endless. Every footstep on icy floors echoed slightly. People adapted to the darkness with ritual. Children were read to by candlelight. Adults prepared food by dim lamps. They measured fuel. They shared comforts. The blackout forced households to move slowly, conserving light and energy. Chores became meditative acts. Outside, black streets created an introspective world. Smoke spiraled from chimneys into the gray sky. Occasionally, a distant train whistle cut the silence, its mournful note a reminder that life, though strained, continued. The blackout nights became another rhythm of the season. Dim candlelight, careful routines, hushed stories. They nurtured resilience. People learned to find warmth not just in fire, but in patience and companionship. They understood the dark world outside was temporary. Together, they would endure it. Fridges became stark monuments of stillness. Frost encased their stone and steel, turning them into glittering sculptures. Over frozen rivers, no sound came but the occasional crack of ice. Travelers approached cautiously. Boots crunched on frost minus hardened surfaces. Each step echoed eerily across the frozen arches. Boats were trapped midstream, hulls rigid, skeletal shapes in the ice. Villagers adapted. They created narrow paths of shoveled snow. Children tiptoed along icy edges. Animals approached warily, hooves clattering or slipping. At night, bridges became magical and dangerous. Frost sparkled under moonlight like a lattice of diamonds. Reflections shimmered in dark water below. From afar, a bridge seemed to hover, suspended between worlds. Despite the hazards, these frozen structures symbolize connection. They while icewines between homes and communities. Proof that even when suspended by ice, people found ways to reach one another. Each cautious crafting was an act of entering. A silent assertion that life, though slowed, continued to flow, just as rivers under ice still moved beneath the surface. In the countryside, vigilance was constant. Farm animals were vulnerable, breath visible in the icy air. Farmers woke before dawn, trudging through deep snow to tend barns. They broke ice for water. Every task was laborious, each movement deliberate. Cows huddled together for warmth. Chickens nestled in hay, feathers dusted with frost. It required careful rationing. Farmers murmured softly to their animals, words of comfort in the cold. Fieldwork was minimal. Snow and ice made the soil impossible to tell. Yet farmers walked the perimeter. They checked fences. They watched for danger. Even small hazards could be catastrophic. The rhythm of these days was slow but unbroken. Feed was distributed. Animals were cared for. Homes were maintained. Meals were sparse, but shared around fires after long hours. The labor carried a quiet dignity, a testament to unspoken resolve. By nightfall, farm cottages glowed faintly. Smoke spiraled into the crisp air. Inside, families gathered to rest, sharing warmth and stories. The bond between humans and animals strengthened by winter's trials. Every day survived was a quiet victory, the reminder that endurance and care could keep life alive in the coldest months. Education faced its own trials. Many schools remained closed, doors sealed by drifts. Windows were frosted over, paths were impassable. Where schools stayed open, teachers faced extraordinary challenges. Ink froze in wells. Coal for stoves dwindled. The bitter cold seeped into every corner. Children arrived bundled in layers. Scarves were wrapped multiple times. Boots were stiff with ice. Mittens were stuffed with newspaper. Every movement was a negotiation with the cold. Yet learning continued in adapted ways. Teachers told stories. They sang songs. They instructed by candlelight. Lessons became shorter, softer, infused with creativity. Inside classrooms, the air was heavy with stove warmth and damp wool. Children huddled together, sharing heat. Those too cold sometimes sat on parents' laps. Outside, the world remained a frozen expanse. Snowdrifts blocked paths. I walked to school was an adventure. Footprints became essential markers. Each step through snow was both effort and play. Even amid hardship, education endured. Lessons, though simplified, nurtured curiosity and imagination. Schoolrooms filled with soft voices and flickering light became havens, reminders that life, learning, and hope persisted. Water became one of the greatest challenges. Wells, streams, and rivers were frozen solid. Families improvised to secure even small quantities for drinking and washing. Each morning, people chipped through ice, hands weighed and stiff. They carried heavy buckets home through snow. In villages, neighbors worked together. They formed chains to pass pails from frozen wells to cottages. The air filled with the hiss of dripping ice and the crunch of boots. Steam rose from freshly melted water, a delicate plume in the cold air. Inside, every drop was precious. Water was rationed carefully, used first for drinking, then for cooking, sparingly for cleaning. Leftover water from one ask was saved for another. Children were given small tasks, carrying a light bucket, stirring a kettle, watching ice melt. These chores taught patience and responsibility. The frozen wells became symbols of resilience. Though blocked and silent, they reminded villagers of vital resources beneath the ice waiting. Each night, as families huddled with cups of warm water, the wells outside served as a quiet reminder. Life, carefully tended, could persist even in the harshest winter. At the deepest hours, the world was suspended in quiet. Outside, snow lay unbroken. Frost clung to every surface, glinting like dusted diamonds. The wind whispered across moors, curling around buildings, seeping through gaps. Inside, the stillness was profound. Fires glowed faintly. Families slept under layers, breath forming tiny clouds. A window rattled. Aider groaned. The fans became part of the nightly rhythm. Animals adapted. Cows shifted gently in barns. Chickens huddled. Cats curled into corners. Dogs twitched in sleep. For those awake, the silence inspired reflection. Letters were written by candlelight. Whispered conversations crossed rooms. Small chores were done with deliberate care. The frozen world outside was harsh and unyielding, but inside, every flicker of flame, every shared blanket, was a tiny triumph, proof of endurance in a time demanding patience and quiet courage. As midnight deepened, the frost remained relentless, yet the human spirit, steadfast and warm, persisted through the stillest hours, ready to meet another day. Travel was measured in perseverance. Paths once easy became treacherous gauntlets. Farmers, postmen, neighbors moved cautiously. Boots sank into knee-high high drift. Hands gripped spades for stability. Every journey required preparation. Scarves and layers shielded faces. Gloves were stuffed with newspaper. Water and a little food were carried. Even short trips could take hours. The cold pressed relentlessly. Children sometimes accompanied adults. Small feet crunched through snow. They rode atop sleds pulled carefully. Laughter was muffled by scarves. Every journey became an adventure, blending necessity with play. Animals aided these tracks. Carriages pulled carts. Hooves slipping. Dogs darted ahead, leaving delicate paw prints. Wildlife moved along predictable routes. At journey's end, travelers arrived exhausted yet triumphant. Hands were raw, faces red, breath ragged. Each step completed was a victory over winter and isolation. As families returned to hearth-warmed homes, these treks were more than errands. They were estimates to human resilience. Small triumphs stitching the frozen landscape together with effort and quiet courage. In towns, queues for rations became a daily fixture. People stood patiently, scarves tight, hands in pockets. The line moved slowly. Frost crept into clothing. The wind whispered sharply. At the front, bakers and shopkeepers worked tirelessly. Each loaf was counted. Every measure of coal was carefully weighed. Families cherished these small victories. A single ration could sustain went through the long night. Children clutched parents' hands, eyes wide with curiosity and fatigue. The queues were an oid and necessity. They became places of quiet camaraderie. Neighbors exchanged advice. They shared news. They offered small acts of kindness. A piece of sugar, an extra scrap of firewood, a comforting word. Laughter occasionally broke through. A brief warmth in a harsh environment. The act of waiting became ritualized. People shifted from foot to foot. They huddled together. They whispered stories. The snow beneath compacted into firm pads etched with footprints. By the time rations were distributed, everyone carried home a tangible reminder of endurance. A loaf of bread, a few pieces of coal, a tin of preserves. Its symbolized resilience, community, and quiet determination to survive another day. As the blackout persisted, candlelight became the heartbeat of every home. The warm, flickering glow filled rooms with soft illumination. Long, gentle shadows stretched across frost-lying walls. The atmosphere was calm, hypnotic. The world outside seemed quieter, suspended. Families gathered close to the few sources of light. Children leaned over small tables, practicing writing or listening. Parents moved carefully, preparing meals, mending clothes. Each action was deliberate to conserve light and energy. The air carried a mixture of scents: melting wax, coal smoke, the faint tang of frost, sometimes the comforting aroma of a simmering stew. Every sense was heightened by the dimness, the warmth of the light, the sound of soft voices, the tactile comfort of blankets. In some villages, neighbors visited in the evenings, cat often and they created small clusters of warmth and connection. Stories were shared, sometimes humorous, sometimes solemn. Each one wove a thread of continuity and hope. Through candlelit evenings, families discovered quiet joys. Oh, the world outside remained cold and unyielding. Inside, the gentle glow nurtured calm, patience, and togetherness. Even reminder that even the darkest winter nights could hold warmth and light. Markets became ghostly. Stalls were covered in snow. Vendors struggled to keep goods from freezing. Produce wrapped in straw glistened with frost. Bread and meat were rationed and stored, not displayed. Shoppers moved slowly along icy lanes. Hooves crunched over compacted snow. Bars were wrapped high. Conversations were whispered, muffled by layers. The atmosphere was hushed, punctuated by the clatter of frozen crates. Merchants. They carved alcoves and snowbanks to store food. They wrapped coal in sacks. They monitored limited supplies. Even a single loaf of bread was a precious treasure. Children peered curiously at frozen stalls. They imagined adventures among snow-lay and vegetables. Sometimes markets became temporary playgrounds. Sleds or small snow forts popped up amidst the lanes. A fleeting brightness against the hardship, despite chill and scarcity. Frozen markets remained hubs of human connection. Neighbors exchanged advice. They shared surplus coal or bread. They offered quiet words of encouragement. Each transaction, no matter how small, was more than commerce, was a thread of resilience, sustaining community and hope. Farmhouses glowed faintly against the white expanse. Inside, fires were ended with meticulous care. Each log and coal carefully positioned. The soft crackle and hiss of burning wood filled the air. It mingled with the scent of peat, smoke, and frost. Families gathered near these hearths, forming islands of warmth. Children nestled under blankets. Parents performed daily chores, churning butter, mending clothes, preparing meals, all near the fire's comfort. The glow illuminated tired faces, creating a gentle sense of security. Farm animals felt the reach of warmth. 1,000 sheep huddled in nearby barns. The soft creaking of frozen gates and the lowing of livestock became part of the evening's rhythm. Farmers checked on them with quiet attention. They adjusted straw. They fed hay. They broke ice in water troughs. Every action, though small, carried profound importance. The difference between comfort and hardship, life and suffering. At night, the flickering fire became both literal and symbolic, a source of heat, light, and sustenance, a symbol of endurance. Families drew strength from it. They shared stories, gentle laughter, quiet prayers. As the wind rattled outside and snow piled higher in the glow of farmhouses, life continued in its slow, deliberate rhythm, a testament to human resilience. Mornings were hushed and surreal. Dawn broke slowly, pale and muted. It barely lit the snow-covered streets. Footprints of the previous day crunched faintly. Smoke from chimneys curled gently into the still air. A few ventured outside at this hour. The cold was sharpest just before sunrise. Frost clung to eyelashes. Horse-drawn carts trudged cautiously. Wheels left faint impressions. Occasionally, a solitary postman or neighbor braved the street, bundled in layers, each movement deliberate. Shop windows simmered with frost. Shapes behind glass were distorted, magical. Snow blanketed the world in white, erasing boundaries. Children peered to frost-laden windows. Parents prepared hearths and hot meals. The quiet was profound. No birds sang. The wind whispered. The frozen river seemed paused. Yet careful movements persisted. Small chores. The shared determination of people facing another frozen day. Dawn brought fragile hope, a reminder that light would eventually prevail. In the hushed, silvered streets, life moved forward slowly, deliberate, patient, enduring. In every village, the baker became a quiet hero. The bakery, often the warmest place, glowed with golden light. The smell of freshly baked bread mingled with coal smoke and frost. It drifted through narrow lanes, offering comfort. Acres rose before dawn. They shoveled snow from doorways. They cleared paths. Coal was carefully measured. Seasons ran nearly continuously. Every loaf was baked with precision. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the icy air outside. It created a sanctuary. Customers moved slowly through the door, bundled in layers, boots stiff with frozen slush. Mothers held children close. Men clutched hats and scarves, all grateful for the small supply of bread. Quiet words of thanks were exchanged. Brief conversations filled the bakery, a modest hub of connection. Children watched with wide eyes, fascinated by the rhythm of kneading, the heat from the oven, the smell of dough. Sometimes they were allowed to help in small ways, dusting flour, moving trays carefully, giving them distraction and a sense of participation. Even as snow piled higher, the village baker provided warmth, nourishment, and hope. The glowing hearth of the bakery was more than a source of bread. It was a symbol of endurance, care, and the profound ability of human hands to nurture life in the coldest of times. As evening fell, streets became both beautiful and treacherous. Coated every surface, turning roads into silver mirrors. They reflected the dim glow of lanterns placed outside doorways. Lanterns, though few, created small circles of light. Their warm flicker offered guidance and reassurance. Villagers moved cautiously. Boots crunched on hardened snow. Scarves wore tight. Knitted were thick. Familiar routes demanded attention. Unseen ice patches threatened slips. Snow banks obscured boundaries. Children walked slowly, sometimes clinging to parents. Dogs padded carefully alongside. Paws left delicate impressions. The soft hum of life persisted. Distant voices carried over crisp air. They shared news, warnings, greetings. Occasionally a cart creaked along. Tiles groaned under icy resistance. The faint whistle of a steam engine hinted at effort. They were symbols of connection. Each glow suggested a home, a family, a neighbor waiting. Whoa. A gentle reassurance that even in the darkest hours, people weren't here. Their light encouraged safe passage. It guided weary travelers. It reminded villagers that life persisted. The streets, though harsh and frozen, were not silent or lifeless. Each lantern, each careful step, each whispered greeting was a thread, weaving the community together, a testament to resilience, patience, and shared determination. Coal was distributed through the steadfast efforts of local merchants. These men and women rose before dawn. They trudged through knee-high deep snow. They delivered precious supplies. Each sack was heavy. Every step required deliberate care. Merchants maintained meticulous records. They ensured every family received a fair share. Occasionally disputes arose, but more often, neighbors helped carry coal inside. Their combined effort turned a grueling task into a quiet act of community. Children lent small hands. They steadied sacks. They carried tiny bundles. Proud to contribute, the scent of coal permeated every home it entered. Earthy, smoky, grounding, a constant reminder of warmth and life. Stoves and hearths glowed brighter as coal was fed. Their heat spread through frozen rooms, melting the chill, lifting spirits. Each burning lump represented comfort and hope, a tangible symbol of endurance. In towns, coal merchants were recognized and appreciated. Villagers greeted them with quiet smiles and nods of thanks, aware that without these deliveries, nights would be colder, survival more precarious. The effort of moving coal became a daily ritual, demanding persistence, patience, and teamwork. By evening, merchants returned home, exhausted but satisfied. Their work had left a trail of warmth, light, and relief. The coal merchant became more than a provider of fuel. They were a lifeline, a quiet hero of survival. The countryside was a silent, glimmering expanse. Snow-covered fields like a thick cloud. Frozen rivers sliced through the land in jagged silver. Hedges were draped in ice, sparkling as though dusted with crystals. Familiar contours disappeared. A surreal world of whitened gray. Farmers moved slowly. Boots crunched over hardened snow. Visible, every fence post, every gate, required inspection and care. Animals huddled in barns or along cleared pathways. Farmers spoke softly to them. Voices carried warmth in the frozen silence. Paths became essential lifelines. Sled tracks, footprints, narrow lanes shoveled by communities. They connected homes, farms, and villages, allowing food, coal, and messages to pass. The rhythm of travel was slow but deliberate, measured in cautious steps. At dawn, the sun's weak rays reflected off ice, scattering light across frozen fields, creating a fragile, ethereal beauty. Frost formed delicate patterns on every surface, a reminder that even in hardship, nature produced wonder. As night approached, the cold intensified. Smoke spiraled from chimneys, that mingled with the mist of frozen air. Countryside settled into silence, yet beneath the snow and ice, life persisted. Farmers, families, and animals endured together. Their steady movements and quiet vigilance kept survival alive. Gardens were transformed into frozen sculptures. Flower beds lay buried, petals trapped in crystalline cages. Leaves stiff and brittle. Vegetable patches were hidden under drifts. Soil frozen solid. Those who tended gardens adapted. Carefully. Greenhouses were dusted of snow. Protective coverings were adjusted. Watering required creativity, as had to be broken. Buckets filled slowly, every drop measured. Children ventured into gardens. They left small footprints. They tossed handfuls of powdery frost. They marveled at icicles. Their laughter, muffled by scarves, added warmth. The frost-bitten gardens became places of quiet reflection. Even frozen, they held beauty. The delicate glint of ice on leaves, the fragile latticework of snow on branches, the soft, muted colors of buried life. For gardeners, These spaces were reminders of resilience. Life persisted beneath the ice, waiting for the sun and thaw. Inside, the memory of the garden's vitality inspired hope. Even as frost pressed against windows, people knew spring would return. The frost-bitten garden, though dormant, symbolized patience and the quiet promise of life beyond winter. Ponds and small lakes became solid expanses of ice. Surfaces glittered under the pale winter sun. Snow drifted in soft patterns. The ice groaned and cracked occasionally, a low, distant sound. Children, carefully supervised, ventured onto frozen ponds. They used makeshift skates or sleds. Laughter echoed across the still air. A fleeting brightness. Each glide was met with cautious joy. Adults moved with measured steps. They checked water supplies. The inside list that could reach in frozen troughs. Sometimes thin ice was broken for essential water. A painstaking process. Every crack required attention and respect. Wildlife adapted. Birds hopped along the edges. Foxes skirted the ice. Occasional fish were visible beneath cracks. At dusk, ponds reflected the faint glow of lanterns from nearby homes, creating a serene, almost magical scene. The frozen waters symbolized endurance and patience, a reminder that life, though paused on the surface, continued beneath, waiting for the warmth of spring to awaken it. Windows became delicate canvases. Frost formed intricate patterns. Leaves, feathers, abstract lace. Each home displayed a unique design. Nature's artistry created overnight. Inside, families pressed faces to the windows to admire. Breaths fogged the glass in soft clouds. Children tapped at the ice, leaving temporary smudges. Parents marveled, a small wonder contrasting with hardship. Frosted windows also served a practical purpose. They insulated slightly, trapping heat inside, keeping biting cold from penetrating fully. Curtains on blankets added layers. The interplay of light and frost created a calm, magical atmosphere. At night, lanterns inside cast amber glows across the frosted glass. Shadows shifted with the flicker. Frozen patterns seemed alive, dancing softly, providing quiet comfort. Even in hardship, frosted windows offered moments of beauty and reflection. They reminded families that amidst struggle, the world still held elegance and ephemeral joy. As March progressed, subtle changes hinted at the end. Sunlight lingered longer, casting a soft golden glow over the snow. Frost on rooftops loosened slightly, creeping slowly in tiny rivulets. Villagers noticed with quiet hope. Paths once rigid softened. Frozen rivers whispered with hints of movement beneath. Farmers checked fields, tapping frozen soil, noting where thaw might allow planting. Children ventured further, testing snowbanks no longer solid. After lighter, the thaw brought both relief and caution. Snow and ice softened unevenly, creating hidden hazards. Slippery patches, slushy streets, unstable riverbanks. Travelers remained vigilant. Boots crunched on wet snow. Valves wrung out water. Yet the promise of movement lifted spirits. Inside, fires burned steadily, now complemented by the warming sun. Melted snow provided more accessible water. Coal rationing eased slightly. Nights grew brighter. Families felt the rhythm shifting. A gentle reminder that endurance had carried them through. The slow thaw became a symbol of patience and resilience. Every drip from a roof, every soft patch of mud, every glimmer of flowing water signaled survival, hope, and the quiet certainty that spring would reclaim the land. As thaw progressed, faint sounds of life returned. Birds appeared in small numbers, hopping across softening snow, perching on frost-dusted branches. The chirps and calls filled the air with promise. Villagers noticed eagerly. Children passed against windows, pointing to robins and blackbirds. Farmers paused to watch small flocks. The sight of birds moving freely was a profound reassurance. Gardeners scattered breadcrumbs and grains. Even small efforts brought delight. A robin hopping closer, a sparrow pecking at seeds. Signs of hope and persistence. The bird's return marked a psychological thaw. Villagers felt the weight of isolation lift slightly, replaced by a sense of renewal. Their songs reminded everyone that the long nights had not broken the continuity of life. As day turned to evening, Brett settled and shouted next. Their presence, delicate and fleeting, symbolized the resilience of nature, offering comfort and a gentle promise that warmth was returning. With thaw advancing, streams began to stir. Patches of dark flowing water appeared, murmuring softly beneath melting edges. The gentle sound of running water filled the countryside, a quiet, soothing reminder. Villagers approached with cautious optimism. Children leaned close, tossing pebbles, marveling at the transformation. Farmers checked streams for livestock, chipping away lingering ice, returning water but subtle scents, wet earth, thawing vegetation. Wildlife responded immediately. Birds flocked near banks. Deer approached cautiously to drink. Foxes crossed shallow stretches. Inside, the sound of thawing streams reached kitchens and hearths, blending with the crackle of fires. Thaw. Melted water eased the burden of ration supplies. The thawed streams symbolized both practical relief and emotional renewal. A small affirmation that endurance was rewarded. By nightfall, streams reflected lanterns and moonlight in rippling patterns, shimmering reminders of movement and resilience. As day lengthened, the pale sun held the sky under. Its rays touched rooftops, gardens, and roads, softening edges, revealing textures. Villagers noticed with quiet gratitude. Windows reflected brighter light, illuminating rooms with a soft glow. Paths began to slush under careful footsteps. Frozen streets showed signs of yielding. Sunlight and lingering frost created shimmering patterns. Delicate and transient, children ventured further, exploring snow-dappled patches, sliding down icy banks one last time, marveling at droplets like jewels. Farmers assessed land for planting, noticing thawed patches. Every task carried renewed purpose. Early spring light altered the atmosphere inside. Fires still glowed, but were complemented by the sun's faint warmth. Families moved with lighter steps, savoring changing days, faring small outdoor chores, enjoying moments once impossible. The gentle light was both practical and symbolic, a quiet assurance that winter was giving way. It reminded everyone that patience and resilience were rewarded. With the sun climbing higher, roofs surrendered their blankets of snow. Icicles softened and lengthened, dripping slowly onto pathways. The rhythmic patter created a gentle, musical backdrop. Villagers moved carefully beneath eaves. Buckets cut dripping water. Children were warned to avoid trickling edges. The sight brought relief, a sign that warmth was returning. Farmers and gardeners noticed with cautious optimism. Thawing roofs allowed sunlight to penetrate frozen soil. Drip of water made outdoor chores easier. Animals stirred more readily. Ground softened. Inside, the sound of dripping water blended with fresh oil, creating a soothing atmosphere. Families found comfort in these small signs, each drop a reminder of survival and perseverance. A melting roof symbolized progress, hope, and the patient triumph of warmth over winter. As snow and ice gave way, paths softened into muddy, fleshy tracks. Footsteps sank slightly. Boots squelched. People moved carefully, testing each step. Though messy and slow, these paths marked freedom. Children reveled in the slushy adventure, stomping in puddles, sliding cautiously, laughing as streams trickled around boots. Adults shared quiet smiles. Pets explored eagerly, paw prints tracing playful patterns. Farmers adapted quickly. Hats and sleds replaced by careful walking. Paths cleared for essential travel. A stock led along safer ground. Each journey was slower, but less perilous. Thawing paths carried symbolic weight. They represented progress, movement, and connection. Veins returning to life. Every footprint, puddle, and muddy track was a testament to resilience. As evening fell, fleshy trails glistened under lantern light, a reflective reminder that winter's grip was loosening, that careful steps were rewarded with movement and renewed freedom. Rivers showed signs of life. Ice cracked and shifted. Gentle creaks and groans echoed. Along banks, snow melted into small rivulets, feeding streams that glistened. Villagers watched with cautious wonder. Children peered over banks, fascinated by contrast. Adults checked livestock and pathways. Even smallest trickles were treasured. Thawed riverbanks became practical sources. Wildlife responded immediately. Ducks and geese returned to open patches. Small mammals emerged. The soft gurgle of water combined with bird calls, a subtle soundtrack of renewal. Farmers assessed carefully. Mud and softened earth required careful navigation. Paths once treacherous now demanded attention to avoid slipping, yet this movement carried hope. The land was awakening. By evening, reflections danced on flowing water, capturing lantern light, sunset hues, the shimmer of thawing ice. Rivers, once frozen and silent, now moved slowly, a metaphor for recovery and resilience. Every ripple whispered reassurance. Life endures. Patience is rewarded. The hearth remained the heart of every home. Families gathered close each evening, enjoying warmth, light, and shared presence. The crackle of coal provided a gentle rhythm. Children retold stories of icy adventures, voices soft but animated. Adults discussed tasks for spring. Even simple meals tasted rich by firelight. Pets nestled nearby, adding comfort and life. Every flicker of flame, every shared glance contributed to a sense of home and security. In some homes, neighbors visited, drawn by warmth and conversation. Candles were carried through softened streets, creating trails of amber light. Stories, advice, and laughter travels, ising communities closer. The hearth, enduring unsteadfast, remained a symbol of resilience. Even as rivers flowed outside, it anchored daily life, offering warmth, light, and reassurance. Families rested in its glow. Hearts buoyed by knowledge the harshest months had passed. Subtle hints of life reappeared. Tiny shoots of green pushed through softened soil. Early flowers peeked from beneath melting snow. Moss glistened along damp stone walls. The landscape began to reveal hidden colors. Villagers noticed with quiet delight. Children pointed excitedly at first blades of grass. Farmers prepared for planting, assessing fields. Every sign of growth carried hope. Gardens showed first signs of recovery. Gardeners cleared slush, checked protective coverings, measured soil temperature. Even small seedlings hinted at renewal. Subtle greens contrasted with remaining snow. A soft palette of whites, pale yellows, tender greens. Birds littered across thawed patches. Streams reflected new light. Every small shoot, every hint of color, symbolized endurance. After weeks of frost, the return of green reminded villagers that life could survive. That patience and care had allowed the land and spirits to emerge renewed. Thaw softening snow, children ventured freely. Boots squelched through slushy paths. Scarves fluttered. Laughter echoed. Snowbanks were safer to climb. Hills became temporary play areas. Teams were improvised from winter's remains, gliding down icy banks, building mud snow castles, chasing returned birds. Even helping with chores became adventures, turning survival into play. Animals participated. Dogs darted between children's feet. Farm cats prowled along thawing fences. Horses and livestock moved more actively. Adults watched from doorways, offering quiet guidance and smiles, appreciating children reclaiming the outdoors. These excursions were both recreation and reassurance, signaling life returning to familiar rhythm. Even in playful resurgence, caution remained. Softening paths demanded attention, teaching early lessons in patience and awareness. Yet joy persisted. gentle and restorative, echoing across the thawing landscape. He reminded that after hardship, small pleasures could once again be embraced. As snow softened, villagers returned to outdoor tasks. Early morning chores involved careful navigation of slushy streets, scraping remaining ice, tending to animals in partially thawed fields. Farmers checked fences, mended gates, inspected barns. Chickens were released to forage. Horses guided along softened paths, halves leaving deep impressions. Children joined in, carrying small bundles of hay, helping with water buckets. Movements cautious but eager, blending responsibility with thrill. Gardeners cleared melting snow, assessed soil, prepared planting beds. Every step deliberate, balancing excitement with residual caution. By evening, treks crisscrossed paths. Animals moved with renewed energy. The soft murmur of water punctuated life returning. First outdoor chores were not just work. They were symbols of resilience and renewal. The patient transition from winter's grip to spring's promise. A new scent filled the air, the rich, earthy aroma of fine soil, wet mud moss, and damp grass combined with winter's crispness. A sensory reminder of life returning. Villagers inhaled deeply as they worked. Farmers felt dampness between fingers. Each pinch of earth, a tactile sign. Children played in softening fields, noticing squelch beneath boots. First brave shoots of green. Gardeners spread compost, turned beds, savoring the scent that promised growth. Paths and roads carried the smell, a sign of movement, of life flowing once more. Animals responded. Cows and sheep grazed eagerly, stirring the earthy fragrance. Inside, the smell mingled faintly with hearth warmth, creating a comforting blend of renewal and security. Every breath carried hope. Every step reinforced resilience. Every small green sprout promised the frozen world had endured. Villages slowly regained rhythm. Neighbors emerged more frequently, treading along softened paths, sharing news, exchanging small gifts. Isolation lifted, replaced by gentle hum of communal life. Children played freely, weaving between adults and animals, laughter echoing. Adults conversed as they completed chores, comparing notes on livestock, gardens, paths. Even brief interactions carried warmth and reassurance. Local markets reopened more fully, offering fresh bread, vegetables, essentials. Clatter of carts and murmur of voices added comforting soundtrack. Thaw encouraged collaboration. Villagers helped clear streets, repaired fences, shared water from newly accessible streams. Each small act reinforced bonds, reminding everyone survival was collective endurance. By evening, villages felt alive again. Lanterns and hearths glowed. Animals rested contentedly. Paths bore footprints of connection. Reconnecting after the long freeze, villagers found renewed hope and laughter, the intangible warmth that accompanies community emerging from hardship. At last, winter's grip loosened entirely. Snow melted into trickling streams. Ice receded from river banks. Fields revealed tender greens and soft browns. Birds sang boldly. Animals moved freely. Air carried scent of wet earth and early blooms. Villagers embraced the changing season with quiet celebration. Children ran through thawed fields, tasting each other, laughing in warm sunlight. Farmers inspected land, planting seeds, ending animals with renewed energy. Chores once arduous now felt manageable, even joyful. Homes remained cozy with fires, but now accompanied by soft glow of spring light through open windows. Families shared meals, stories, laughter, savoring comfort of hearth and promise of longer days. Pets reveled in new freedom, chasing through softening yards. The big freeze of 1947, with its blackouts and hardship, had ended. What remained was memory of struggle, and the strength, resilience, and unity it forged. Spring's gentle arrival reminded everyone that even harshest winters could be survived with patience, care, and community. As countryside awakened, life returned fully, quiet, steady, enduring, a testament to human spirit and timeless rhythm of season. They became places of quiet camaraderie. Neighbors exchanged advice, shared news, and offered small acts of kindness. A piece of sugar, an extra scrap of firewood, or a comforting word. Laughter occasionally broke through the cold, a brief warmth in an otherwise harsh environment. Even the act of waiting became ritualized. People shifted from foot to stave off numbness, huddled together for warmth, and whispered stories to pass the time. The snow beneath them compacted into firm paths etched with footprints and mocked the rhythm of survival. At the time rations were distributed, everyone returned home carrying a tangible reminder of endurance. A loaf of bread, a few pieces of coal, or a tin of preserves represented more than sustenance. It symbolized resilience, community, and the quiet determination to survive another day under winter's unyielding grip. As the blackout persisted, candlelight became the heartbeat of every home. The warm, flickering glow filled rooms with soft illumination, casting long, gentle shadows that stretched across frost-lined walls. The atmosphere was calm, almost hypnotic, and the world outside seemed even quieter, suspended under the heavy snow and ice. Families gathered close to the few sources of light. Children leaned over small tables, practicing writing or listening to stories read aloud. Parents moved carefully, preparing meals, mending clothes, or stoking small fires. Each action deliberate to conserve lightened energy. Even simple movements became intentional, choreographed to the rhythm of the candle's flame. The air carried a mixture of scents, melting wax, coal smoke from nearby hearths, the faint tang of frost seeping through cracks in doors and windows, and sometimes the comforting aroma of a simmering stew. Every sense was heightened by the dimness, the warmth of the light, the sound of soft voices, the tactile comfort of blankets and wool. In some villages, neighbors would visit one another in the evenings, candles in hand, creating small clusters of warmth and connection. Stories were shared, sometimes humorous, sometimes solemn, each one weaving a thread of continuity and hope into the long nights. Through candle-lit evenings, families discovered quiet joys and solace in routine, though the world outside remained cold and unyielding. Inside, the gentle glow of candlelight nurtured calm, patience, and a sense of togetherness, reminding all that even the darkest and coldest winter nights could hold warmth and light when hearts and homes persisted. Markets, usually bustling with life, became ghostly during the big freeze. Stalls were covered in snow and vendors struggled to keep perishable goods from freezing solid. Produce wrapped carefully in straw or cloth glistened with frost while bread, dough, and meat were rationed and stored in cold pantries rather than displayed openly. Shoppers moved slowly along icy lanes between stalls, boots crunching over compacted snow, scarves wrapped high to ward off windburn. Conversations were whispered or muffled by layers of clothing, creating a hushed atmosphere punctuated only by the occasional clatter of frozen crates or the soft crunch of snow beneath carts. Merchants adapted with ingenuity. They carved small aloes in snow banks to store food, wrapped coal in sacks to insulate warmth, and carefully monitored their limited supplies. Even a single loaf of bread or a few potatoes were treated as precious treasures distributed with caution and a quiet sense of responsibility. Children, often accompanying parents, peered curiously at frozen stalls, imagining adventures among the snow-laden vegetables and ice-crusted fruits. Sometimes the markets became temporary playgrounds, sleds or small snow forts popping up amidst the narrow lanes, a fleeting brightness against the hardship surrounding them. Despite the chill and scarcity, frozen markets remained hubs of human connection. Neighbors exchanged advice, shared surplus coal or bread, and offered quiet words of encouragement. Each transaction, no matter how small, was more than commerce, was a thread of resilience, sustaining community and hope. And as even defined by snow, ice, and endurance, farmhouses glowed faintly against the white expanse of frozen fields. Inside, fires were ended with meticulous care, each log and coal carefully positioned to extract maximum warmth. The soft crackle and hiss of burning wood filled the air, mingling with the scent of peat smoke and frost creeping through tiny gaps in doors and windows. Families gathered near these hearths, forming small islands of warmth. Children nestled under thick blankets or sat on laps while parents performed daily chores, churning butter, mending clothing, or preparing simple meals, all while remaining close enough to feel the fire's comforting heat. The glow illuminated tired faces, creating a gentle sense of security amidst the cold and snow outside. The farm animals, too, felt the reach of warmth. 1,000 sheep huddled in barns just steps away from the house, while the soft creaking of frozen gates and the occasional low ing of livestock became part of the evening's rhythm. Farmers checked on them with quiet attention, adjusting straw, feeding hay, and breaking ice and water troughs. Every action, though small, carried profound importance. The difference between comfort and hardship, life and suffering. At night, the flickering fire became both literal and symbolic. It was a source of heat, light, and sustenance. Yes, and also a symbol of endurance. Families drew strength from it, sharing stories, gentle laughter, and quiet prayers as the wind railed outside and the snow piled ever higher. In the glow of these farmhouses, life continued in its slow, deliberate rhythm, a testament to human resilience in the face of an unrelenting winter. Mornings during the binge freeze were hushed and surreal. Dawn broke slowly, pale and muted, barely lighting the snow-covered streets. Footprints of the previous day crunched faintly under frost, and smoke from chimneys curled gently into the still air, hinting at the warmth and life hidden inside the houses. He who ventured outside at this hour. The cold was sharpest just before sunrise, frost clinging to eyelashes, and eyelashes rind in white. A horse-drawn cart stretched cautiously along icy lanes, and was leaving faint impressions in the compacted snow. Occasionally, a solitary postman or neighbor braved the streets bundled in layers, each movement deliberate to preserve warmth and energy. Shop windows shimmer red with the shapes behind glass distorted and magical. Snow blanketed the world in white, erasing boundaries and softening edges, transforming familiar roads and alleyways into something almost otherworldly. Children peered through frost-laden windows, eager to witness the day unfold, while parents prepared hearths and hot meals to chase the lingering chill from the house. The quiet was profound. No bird sang. The wind whispered softly through streets and trees, and even the river, frozen solid, seemed paused in anticipation of spring. Yet despite the silence, the city and countryside were alive with careful movements, small chores, and a shared unspoken determination of people facing another frozen day. Dawn brought a fragile hope, a reminder that light would eventually prevail, even as the snow deepened. And in the hushed, silvered streets, life moved forward slowly, deliberate, patient, and enduring. In every village, the baker became a quiet hero of survival. The bakery, often the warmest place in town, glowed with the soft golden light of a hearth and oven. The smell of freshly baked bread mingling with coal smoke and frost in the air drifted through narrow lanes, offering comfort and sustenance to all who approached. Bakers rose before dawn, even earlier than usual, shoveling snow from doorways and clearing paths so villagers could reach them. Coal was carefully measured to fuel ovens that needed to run nearly continuously, and every loaf was baked with precision to last as long as possible. The warmth inside the bakery contrasted sharply with the icy air outside, creating a sanctuary that drew the community together. Customers moved slowly through the door, bundled in layers, boot stiff with frozen slush. Mothers held children close. Men clutched hats and scarves, all grateful for the small supply of bread that could sustain their families for the day. Quiet words of thanks and brief conversations filled the bakery, a modest hub of connection amid the harsh isolation of winter. Children often watched with wide eyes, fascinated by the rhythm of kneading, the heat radiating from the oven, and the smell of dough rising. Sometimes they were allowed to help in small ways, dusting flour on tables, moving trays carefully, giving them both distraction and a sense of participation in the daily act of survival. Even as snow piled higher outside and the wind whistled along streets and rooftops, The village baker provided warmth, nourishment, and hope. The glowing hearth of the bakery was more than a source of bread. It was a symbol of endurance, care, and the simple yet profound ability of human hands to nurture life in the coldest of times. As evening fell, streets became both beautiful and treacherous under the persistent snow. This coated every surface, turning roads into silver mirrors that reflected the dim glow of lanterns placed outside doorways. These lanterns, though few, created small circles of light in the darkness, their warm flicker offering guidance and reassurance to travelers navigating a frozen world. Villagers moved cautiously, boots crunching on hardened snow, scarves wrapped tightly on mittens thick with layers. Even familiar routes demanded attention as unseen ice patches threatened sudden slips, and snow banks obscured boundaries between streets and fields. Children walked slowly, sometimes clinging to parents or older siblings, while dogs padded carefully alongside, paws leaving delicate impressions in the snow. The soft hum of life persisted amid the frozen streets. Distant voices carried over crisp air, sharing news, warnings, or greetings. Occasionally a cart creaked along, wheels groaning under racy resistance, and the faint whistle of a steam engine hinted at the effort required to keep commerce and supplies moving despite the freeze. Lanterns became more than illumination. They were symbols of connection. Each glow suggested a home, a family, or a neighbor waiting, a gentle reassurance that even in the darkest, coldest hours, people weren't near. Their light encouraged safe passage, guided weary travelers, and reminded villagers that life persisted even when snow and ice seemed insurmountable. The streets, though harsh and frozen, were not silent or lifeless. Each lantern, each careful step, each whispered greeting was a thread weaving the community together, a testament to resilience, patience, and shared determination under the unyielding grip of winter. Coal, the lifeblood of warmth, during the big freeze, was distributed largely through the steadfast efforts of local merchants. These men and women rose before dawn, trudging through knee-deep snow, delivering precious supplies to homes and businesses. Each sack was heavy, and every step required deliberate care against slippery paths and drifting snow. Merchants maintained meticulous records, ensuring that every family received their fair share despite the scarcity. Occasional disputes arose, but more often neighbors helped one another carry coal in sight, their combined effort turning a grueling task into a quiet act of community. Even children lent small hands to steady sacks or carried tiny bundles, proud to contribute to the household survival. The scent of coal permeated every home it entered, earthy, smoky, and grounding, the constant reminder of warmth and life. Stoves and hearths glowed brighter as coal was fed steadily, their heat spreading through frozen rooms, melting the chill and lifting spirits. Each burning lamp represented comfort and hope, a tangible symbol of endurance in a time when the cold seemed endless. In towns, coal merchants were recognized and appreciated for their unwavering labor. Villagers greeted them with quiet smiles and nods of thanks, aware that without these deliveries, nights would be colder, meals meager, and survival more precarious. The effort of moving coal from streets and carts into homes became a daily ritual demanding persistence, patience, and careful teamwork. That evening, when merchants returned home, exhausted but satisfied, their work had left a trail of warmth, light, and relief throughout the town. In this way, the coal merchant became more than a provider of fuel. They were a lifeline, a quiet hero of survival in Britain's frozen landscape. The countryside under the biff freeze was a silent, glimmering expanse. Snow-covered fields like a thick quilt. Frozen rivers sliced through the land in jagged silver, and hedgewood raped in ice, sparkling as though dusted with crystals. The familiar contours of the landscape disappeared, leaving a surreal, almost otherworldly world of whitened gray. Farmers moved slowly through this environment, boots crunching over hardened snow, breath visible in the cold air. Every fence post, every gate, every foot of field required inspection, care, and attention. Animals huddled in barns or along cleared pathways, and farmers spoke softly to them, their voices carrying warmth and reassurance in the otherwise frozen silence. Paths became essential lifelines, foot tracks, footprints, and the narrow lanes shoveled by communities connected homes, farms, and villages, allowing food, cold, and messages to pass. Even when roads were impassable, the rhythm of travel was slow but deliberate, measured in cautious steps rather than hurried motion. The dawn, the sun's weak rays reflected off ice-covered surfaces, scattering light across the frozen fields and creating a fragile, ethereal beauty. Frost formed delicate patterns on every surface from blades of grass to rooftops, a reminder that even in hardship, nature produced moments of wonder. As night approached, the cold intensified. Smoke spiraled from chimneys, mingling with the mist of frozen air, while the countryside settled into silence. Yet beneath the snow and ice, life persisted. Farmers, families, and animals endured together, their steady movements and quiet vigilance, keeping survival alive amid a world that seemed suspended in frost. Gardens, usually places of life and growth, were transformed into frozen sculptures under the relentless winter. Flower beds lay buried beneath a thick crust of ice and snow, petals trapped in crystalline cages, leaves stiff and brittle. Vegetable patches once vibrant with early crops were hidden under drifts, soil frozen solid, inaccessible to even the most determined gardener. Those who tended gardens adapted as best they could. Paths were shoveled carefully, greenhouses dusted of snow, and protective coverings adjusted to shield the few surviving plants from frostbite. Watering required creativity. Ice had to be broken, buckets filled slowly, and every drop measured to avoid waste. Even the simplest task, once routine, became a deliberate exercise in patience. Children sometimes ventured into the gardens, leaving small footprints in the snow, tossing handfuls of powdery frost, or marveling at icicles, hanging like chandeliers from fences and tea-row uses. Their laughter, muffled by scarves, added warmth to an otherwise frozen world. The frostbitten gardens also became places of quiet reflection. Even in their frozen state they held beauty, the delicate glint of ice on leaves, the fragile lattice-work of snow on branches, and the soft muted colors of buried life. For gardeners and villagers alike, these spaces were reminders of resilience. Life persisted beneath the ice, waiting for the sun and thaw to release it once more. Inside homes, the memory of the garden's vitality inspired hope. Even as frost pressed against windows and cold crept through doors, people knew that spring would return. The frost-bitten garden, though dormant, symbolized patience, endurance, and the quiet promise of life beyond winter's grasp. Ponds and small lakes, once places of reflection and recreation, had become solid expanses of ice. Their surfaces glittered faintly under the pale winter sun, snow drifting in soft patterns that made the frozen water resemble delicate lace. The ice groaned and cracked occasionally, a low distant sound that reminded villagers of the hidden movement beneath the surface. Children carefully supervised sometimes ventured onto these frozen ponds with makeshift skates or sleds. Their laughter echoed across the still air, a fleeting brightness against the stark white landscape. Each glide or slide was met with cautious joy, balancing thrill with awareness of the hidden dangers beneath the ice. The adults moved with more measured steps, checking water supplies and ensuring lifts that could reach unfrozen trout. Sometimes thin layers of ice were broken to access essential water for homes and animals, a painstaking and careful process. Every crack in the ice, every ripple of water required attention and respect, for the frozen ponds were both beauty and challenge. Wildlife adapted as well. Fruit hopped along the edges of frozen water. Foxes skirted the ice for safer ground, and occasional fish visible beneath cracks reminded observers that life continued even beneath the frozen surface. By dusk, the ponds reflected the faint glow of lanterns and candles from nearby homes, creating a serene and almost magical scene. The frozen waters symbolized endurance and patience, a reminder that life, though caused on the surface, continued beneath, waiting for the warmth and light of spring to awaken it once again. Windows across Britain became delicate canvases during the Big Freeze. Frost formed intricate patterns, weaving leaves, feathers, and abstract lace across glass panes. Each home displayed a unique design. Nature's artistry created overnight as cold air kissed the glass and moisture froze in delicate formations. Inside, families pressed their faces to the windows to admire these patterns, their breaths fighting the glass in soft clouds. Children apped at the ice, leaving temporary smudges that disappeared as quickly as they were made. Parents marveled at the intricate designs, a small wonder that contrasted with the hardships outside. Frosted windows also served a practical purpose. They insulated homes slightly, trapping heat inside while keeping the biting cold from penetrating fully. Curtains and blankets added layers, softening the drafts that slipped through old frames. The interplay of light and frost created a calm, almost magical atmosphere in rooms dimly lit by candle or hearth. At night, lanterns inside the house cast amber glows across the frosted glass. Shadows shifted with the flicker, and the frozen patterns seemed alive, dancing softly in the warm light. The effect was both soothing and mesmerizing, providing quiet comfort during long, cold evenings. Even in hardship, the frosted windows offered moments of beauty and reflection. They reminded families that amidst struggle and endurance, the walls still held elegance, delicate detail, and ephemeral joy, even when the snow laid deep and the wind howled across the frozen land. As March progressed, subtle changes hinted at the approaching end of the big freeze. Sunlight, though still pale and weak, lingered longer each day, casting a soft golden glow over the snow-laden landscape. Frost on rooftops and windows began to loosen slightly, dripping slowly in tiny rivulets that sparkled in the morning light. Villagers noticed these shifts with quiet hope. Paths once rigid and treacherous softened under careful footsteps, and frozen rivers whispered with the first hints of movement beneath the ice. Farmers checked their fields, gently tapping frozen soil and noting where thaw might allow early planting. Children ventured further from home, testing snow banks that were no longer solid, their laughter lighter as the world showed signs of yielding to warmth. The thaw brought both relief and caution. Snow and ice softened unevenly, creating hidden hazards, slippery patches, slushy streets, and unstable riverbanks. Travelers remained vigilant, boots crunching out snow, gloves wringing out water from melting mittens. Yet the promise of movement, of returning life and activity, lifted spirits across towns and countryside alike. Inside homes, fires burned steadily, now complemented by the warming sun. Salted snow provided more accessible water. Coal rationing eased slightly, and the long nights of darkness gave way to gradually brighter evenings. Families felt the rhythm of winter shifting, a gentle reminder that their endurance had carried them through the harshest months. The slow thaw, imperceptible at first, became a symbol of patience and resilience. Every drip from a roof, every soft patch of mud, every glimmer of flowing water signaled survival, hope, and the quiet certainty that spring would eventually reclaim the frozen land. As the thaw progressed, the faint sounds of life began to return to the frozen countryside. Guards once absent or silent during the harshest months started to appear in small numbers, hopping across softening snow and perching on frost-dusted branches. Their chirps and calls, gentle yet persistent, filled the air with the promise of renewal. Villagers noticed them eagerly. Children passed against frosted windows, pointing to robins and blackbirds that had braved the cold. Farmers paused in fields to watch small flocks alight near streams or gardens, searching for food as insects and seeds became more accessible with melting snow. The sight of birds moving freely after weeks of winter's grip was a subtle yet profound reassurance of life returning. Gardeners and townsfolk alike began scattering breadcrumbs, grains, and scraps to aid these early arrivals. Even small efforts brought delight. A robin hopping closer, a sparrow pecking at scattered seeds. Signs of hope and persistence in a world recently dominated by frost. The bird's return also marked a psychological thaw. Villagers felt the weight of winter's isolation lift slightly, replaced by a sense of renewal. Their songs, soft but insistent, reminded everyone that the long nights, frozen streets, and relentless snow had not broken the continuity of life. As day turned to evening, the birds sang being shouted at, Their movements quiet yet steady, their presence, delicate and fleeting, symbolize the resilience of nature and the enduring rhythm of survival, offering comfort in the gentle promise that warmth and light were steadily returning to Britain's frozen landscape. With the thaw advancing, streams and small rivers began to stir, and after weeks of ice-bound stillness, what had been solid expanses of frozen silver now revealed patches of dark flowing water, murmuring softly as it moved beneath melting edges. The gentle sound of running water filled the countryside, a quiet, soothing reminder that life persisted even after the harshest cold. Villagers approached these streams with cautious optimism. Children leaned close to watch water ripple beneath the ice, tossing small pebbles and marveling at how quickly the frozen surface had transformed. Farmers checked the streams to ensure that livestock could access fresh water safely, chipping away lingering ice where necessary. The returning water brought subtle scents and textures to the air, wet earth, moss and thawing vegetation, mingling with the lingering crispness of winter. Wildlife responded immediately. Birds flocked near the bank. Steer approached cautiously to drink, and even foxes were seen crossing shallow stretches to forage. Every movement suggested renewal and awakening after weeks of frozen sigh. Inside homes, the sound of thawing streams reached kitchens and hearths, blending with the steady crackle of fires. Melted water eased the burden of ration supplies, allowing families to cook and clean with slightly less hardship. The thawed streams symbolized both practical relief and emotional renewal, a small but vital affirmation that endurance and patience were rewarded with a slow return of life. By nightfall, the streams reflected lanterns and moonlight in rippling patterns, shimmering reminders of movement, resilience, and the gentle rhythm of life returning to Britain's frozen landscape. As days lengthened, the pale sun began to hold the sky longer, casting early spring light over snow-tinged fields. Though the frost still lingered in corners and shaded hollows, the warming rays touched rooftops, gardens, and roads, softening edges and revealing textures previously hidden beneath layers of ice and snow. Villagers noticed the change with quiet gratitude. Windows reflected the brighter light, illuminating rooms with a soft glow that required less candle light. Paths once treacherous began to slush under careful footsteps, and even frozen streets showed signs of yielding to the thaw. The interplay of sunlight and lingering frost created shimmering patterns across rooftops and hedgerows, delicate and transient, as though nature itself were celebrating endurance. Children ventured further into the fields, exploring snow-dappled patches, sliding down icy banks one last time, and marveling at droplets of water glistening like tiny jewels. Farmers assessed the land for early planting, noticing thawed patches where seeds could soon take root. Every task, though still cautious, carried a sense of renewed purpose. The early spring light also altered the atmosphere inside homes. Fires still glowed, but their heat was now complemented by the sun's faint warmth streaming through partially frosted windows. Families moved with lighter steps, savoring the changing days, sharing small outdoor chores, and enjoying moments that had been impossible during the harshest freeze. The gentle light of early spring was both practical and symbolic, a quiet assurance that the relentless winter was gradually giving way. It reminded everyone that patience and resilience were rewarded and that the frozen landscape, though recently inhabitable, was beginning its transformation back into a living, thriving world. Fun climbing higher each day, the roofs of cottages, barns, and shops began to surrender the thick blankets of snow. Sickles, unsharpened rigid, softened and lengthened, dripping slowly onto pathways and garden beds below. The rhythmic patter of melting snow created a gentle, almost musical backdrop to daily life. Villagers moved carefully beneath these eaves. Buckets were placed to catch dripping water, and children were warned to avoid the trickling edges, turning even this natural phenomenon into a quiet lesson in awareness and patience. Yet, a sight of melting snow brought relief, a sign that warmth was returning and that the long oppressive freeze was finally loosening its grip. Farmers and gardeners noticed the changing landscape with cautious optimism. Thawing roofs allowed sunlight to penetrate frozen soil more effectively, and the drip of water onto previously icy paths made early outdoor chores easier. Animals stirred more readily, and movements freer as the ground softened underfoot. Inside homes, the sound of dripping water blended with the steady warmth of hearths, creating a soothing atmosphere. Families found comfort in these small signs of change, each drop a reminder of survival, perseverance, and the slow, inevitable return of spring. The melting roofs and dripping eaves were more than a physical transformation. They symbolized progress, hope, and the patient triumph of warmth and life over the long, harsh winter. Every drop that fell carried a quiet message. Endurance is rewarded in the frozen world is slowly waking. But snow and ice began to give way. The once treacherous paths through villages and countryside softened into muddy, slushy tracks. Footsteps sank slightly, boots squat-ching as people moved carefully, testing each step to avoid hidden patches of lingering ice. Though messy and slow, these early thawing paths marked freedom, allowing villagers to venture further than they had in weeks. Children reveled in the slushy adventure, stomping in puddles, sliding cautiously on remaining ice, and laughing as small streams of melted snow trickled around their boots. But adults, still cautious, shared quiet smiles at the tiny joys visible in these simple thawed stretches. Even pets eagerly explored, paw-prints tracing playful patterns through mud and slush. Farmers and delivery workers adapted quickly. Huts and sledge replaced by careful walking, paths cleared for essential travel, and livestock led along the safer ground now exposed by melting snow. Each journey along these softening routes was slower, but infinitely less perilous than the icebound tracks of deep winter. The thawing paths also carried symbolic weight. They represented progress, movement, and connection, veins returning to life in a landscape long immobilized. Every footprint, puddle, and muddy track was a quiet testament to human resilience, to the enduring spirit that had carried villages through weeks of frozen hardship. As evening fell, the slushy trails glistened under lantern and hearth light, a reflective reminder that winter's grip was loosening, and that patience, perseverance, and careful steps were finally rewarded with movement, hope, and renewed freedom. Rivers that had been frozen thawed for weeks began to show signs of life. Cracked and shifted, creating gentle creaks and groans that echoed through valleys and villages. Along the banks, snow melted into smaller ivulets, feeding streams that glistened in the soft sunlight. A quiet symphony of movement after weeks of stillness. Villagers watched the slow awakening with cautious wonder. Children peered over banks, fascinated by the contrast between solid ice and flowing water, while adults checked livestock and pathways to ensure safety. Even the smallest trickles of water were measured. Thawed river banks became practical sources for irrigation, animal drinking, and household needs. Wildlife responded immediately. Ducks and geese returned to open patches of water, while small mammals emerged cautiously from burrows. The soft gurgle of water combined with distant bird calls created a subtle soundtrack of renewal, comforting and reassuring those who had endured the harshest weeks of frost. Farmers assessed the riverbanks carefully. Mud and softened earth required careful navigation, and paths once treacherous with ice now demanded attention to avoid slipping in wet ground. Yet this careful movement carried hope. The land itself was awakening, offering sustenance and opportunity once again. By evening, reflections danced on the flowing water, capturing lantern light, sunset hues, and the quiet shimmer of thawing ice. The rivers, once frozen and silent, now moved slowly, a metaphor for recovery and resilience. Every ripple whispered reassuring. Life endures, patience is rewarded, and the long winter was finally giving way to the gentle embrace of spring. Even as the thaw progressed outside, the hearth remained the heart of every home. Families continued to gather close to fires each evening, enjoying warmth, light, and the soft comfort of shared presence. The crackle of colander would provide a gentle rhythmic backdrop to conversations, meals, and quiet reflection. Children still captivated by the long months of winter retold stories of icy adventures and snowbound escapades, Their voices, soft but animated, mixed with a gentle hum of adults discussing tasks for the coming spring. Even simple meals tasted richer when eaten by firelight, the warmth lending a sense of safety and continuity after weeks of cold and hardship. Pets nestled nearby, curling into soft corners or resting on warm floors, their presence adding comfort and life to the rooms. Every flicker of flame, every whisper, and every shared glance contributed to a quiet sense of home and security, reminding all that survival was not just about enduring the cold, a nurturing connection and companionship. In some homes, neighbors visited, drawn by the promise of warmth and conversation. Candles and lanterns would airy through softened streets, creating trails of amber light that punctuated the evening gloom. Stories, advice, and laughter traveled from house to house, knitting communities closer together after the long isolation imposed by frost and snow. The hearth, enduring and steadfast, remained a symbol of resilience and comfort. Even as rivers flowed and snow softened outside, it anchored daily life, offering warmth, light, and reassurance. Families rested in its glow, hearts buoyed by the knowledge that the harshest winter months had passed, and that the slow, gentle renewal of spring was steadily unfolding. As the thaw continued, subtle hints of life began to reappear across the countryside. Tiny shoots of green pushed through softened soil. Brave early flowers peeked from beneath melting snow, and moss glistened along damp stone walls. The landscape, once monochrome under ice and frost, started to reveal its hidden textures and colors. Villagers noticed these changes with quiet delight. Children pointed excitedly at the first blades of grass, or the early blooms of crocus and snowdrop. Farmers prepared for planting, assessing which fields could now be worked and which patches still held frost. Every sign of growth carried hope, a visual reassurance that nature was resilient and spring was returning. Gardens previously frostbitten and dormant showed the first signs of recovery. Gardeners gently cleared slush, checked protective coverings, and measured soil temperature with practiced care. Even small seedlings saved beneath straw in greenhouses hinted at renewal and the reward of patience. The subtle greens contrasted with the remaining snow, creating a soft palette of muted whites, pale yellows, and tender greens. Birds flittered across thawed patches, landing cautiously on the first sprouts, while streams reflected the new lightened shimmer red with soft ripples. Every small shoot, every hint of colors symbolized entrance and hope. After weeks of frost and hardship, the return of green reminded villagers that life could survive even the harshest winter, and that patience, resilience, and terror had allowed the land and their spirits to emerge renewed. With the thaws softening snowing dice, children finally ventured more freely outdoors. Boots ed through slushy paths, scarves fluttered in gentle breezes, and laughter echoed across streets and fields as they explored the winter-weary landscape. Snow banks were now safer to climb, and puddles from melting ice became temporary play areas, their reflective surfaces turning into miniature lakes for imagination to roam. Games were improvised from the remains of winter, sliding down icy banks one last time, building mud snow castles or chasing the few birds that had returned to the fields. Even the small tasks of helping adults with chores, carrying pails of water or clearing debris became adventures, turning survival into play and fostering both resilience and creativity. Animals participated as well. Dogs darted between children's feet, kicking up slush, while farm cats prowled cautiously along thawing fences. Horses and livestock, freed from the heaviest snow, began moving more actively, their presence adding life and motion to the slowly awakening countryside. The adults watched from doorways or paths, offering quiet guidance and occasional smiles, appreciating the sight of children reclaiming the outdoors after weeks of confinement. These excursions were both recreation and reassurance, signaling that life was returning to a familiar rhythm and that winter's long grip was finally loosening. Even in this playful resurgence, caution remained. Softening paths and thawing riverbanks demanded attention, teaching children early lessons in patience and awareness. Yet joy persisted, gentle and restorative, echoing across the thawing landscape, a reminder that even after hardship, The small pleasures of life could once again be embraced. As the snow softened and paths thawed, villagers began returning to outdoor tasks that had been impossible during the freshest weeks of the Big Freeze. Yearly morning chores involved careful navigation of slushy streets, gentle scraping of remaining ice, and tending to animals now moving more freely in partially thawed fields. Farmers checked fences, mended broken gates, and inspected barns, ensuring that livestock could graze safely on emerging patches of grass. Chickens were released to forage under watchful eyes, and horses were guided along softened paths, their hooves leaving deep impressions in wet snow. The world, once immobilized, gradually began to move again under careful human hands. Children often joined in these tasks, carrying small bundles of hay or helping with water buckets. Their movements were cautious but eager, blending responsibility with the thrill of reconnecting with the outdoors. Even seemingly mundane chores became opportunities for observation, learning, and quiet appreciation of the thawing environment. Gardeners cleared melting snow from protective coverings, assessed the condition of soil, and prepared early planting beds. Every step in these outdoor chores was deliberate, balancing the excitement of emerging spring with the residual caution born of weeks of frozen hardship. By evening, these tasks left the village a quieter but more animated place. Tracks crisscrossed paths, animals moved with renewed energy, and the soft murmur of water from thawed streams punctuated the gentle rhythm of life returning. The first outdoor chores were not just necessary work. They were symbols of resilience, renewal, and the patient transition from winter's grip to spring's promise. The snow melted and the last patches of ice gave way. A new scent filled the air, the rich, earthy aroma of thawing soil. Wet mud, moss, and damp grass combined with the lingering presence of wear to create a smell that was both grounding and invigorating, a sensory reminder of life returning to the land. Villagers inhaled deeply as they worked outdoors, appreciating the subtle perfume of renewal. Farmers kneeling to check soil for early planting felt the dampness between their fingers, each pinch of earth a tactile sign that the land had survived and was ready to support life again. Children played carefully in the softening fields, noticing the squelch beneath boots and the first braid shoots of green emerging from the soil. Gardeners spread compost and turned beds, savoring the scent that promised growth and abundance. Paths and roads, though still muddy, carried the smell as a sign of movement, of life flowing once more after weeks of immobilization. Even animals responded. Cows and sheep grazed more eagerly on soft patches of grass, their movements stirring the earthy fragrance into the air. Inside homes, the smell of wet earth mingled faintly with the warmth of hearths, creating a comforting blend of renewal and security. Every breath carried hope. Every step outside reinforced resilience, and every small green sprout promised that the frozen world had endured and that spring, though tentative, was quietly emerging. With the thaw well underway, villages slowly regained their rhythm. Neighbors emerged from homes more frequently, greeting one another along softened paths, sharing news and exchanging small gifts of food or firewood. The isolation imposed by snow and ice was lifting, replaced by the gentle hum of communal life. Children played freely once more, weaving between adults and animals, their laughter echoing across streets and fields. Adults conversed as they completed chores, comparing notes on livestock, gardens, and thawed paths. Even brief interactions carried warmth and reassurance, a reminder of shared resilience through the freshest months. Local markets reopened more fully, offering fresh bread, vegetables, and other essentials while still mindful of remaining winter challenges. The clatter of carts and the murmur of voices added a comforting soundtrack to the slow reawakening of everyday life. The thaw encouraged collaboration. Villagers helped clear streets of lingering ice, repaired fences, and shared water from newly accessible streams. Each small act of assistance reinforced bonds, reminding everyone that survival was not just individual effort, but collective endurance. By evening, the village felt alive once again. Lanterns and hearths glowed, animals rested contentedly, and paths bore footprints of connection and movement. Connecting after the long freeze, villagers found not only practical support, but renewed hope, laughter, and reassurance. The intangible warmth that accompanies community emerging from hardship. At last, the frozen grip of winter loosened entirely. Snow melted into trickling streams. Ice receded from river banks, and the fields, once dark and white, revealed their tender greens and soft browns. Birds sang more boldly. Animals moved freely, and the air carried the gentle scent of wet earth and early blooms. Villagers embraced the changing season with quiet celebration. Children ran through thawed fields, chasing each other and laughing in the warm sunlight. Farmers inspected their land, planting seeds and tending animals with renewed energy. The chores that had seemed arduous in frost and snow now felt manageable, even joyful, as life resumed its natural rhythm. Homes remained cozy with fires, but now they were accompanied by the soft glow of spring light streaming through open windows. Families shared meals, stories, and laughter, savoring both the comfort of hearth and the promise of longer, brighter days ahead. Pets too reveled in the new freedom, chasing each other through softening yards and fields. The big freeze of 1947, with its blackouts, hardship, and relentless cold, had finally ended. What remained was not just the memory of struggle, but the strength, resilience, and unity it had forged. Spring's gentle arrival reminded everyone that even the harshest winters could be survived with patience, care, and community. And so, as the countryside awakened, life returned fully quiet, steady, and enduring. A testament to the human spirit and the timeless rhythm of the season. Thank you for joining this journey through Britain's winter of blackouts and hardship. Fresno, letting the gentle rhythms of resilience and renewal lull you into calm. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Share where you're watching from, whether it's the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, or elsewhere. And at whatever time you've joined, sleep peacefully, and may the warmth of community and hope carry you through your tunes.